yourself a glass of anything. It's Monday and I'm mixing it up, so I'm going to be having a mixed drink. There's no sound. Ew. Loud. especially when you're at like a Airbnb or that type of thing. You don't know what people have left behind. Not even the owners either, like other people staying there. It's just creepy. And now for the final story. Possibly the creepiest. Definitely the longest. But I hope you guys have been enjoying yourselves thus far. Again, if you want your stories in here, send I slammed the mother effing doors locked, fumbled for my keys, and sped down the road as if my life depended on it. Thankfully, but also surprisingly, he did not follow me after. The road had a few turns in it, so he wasn't inside of my vehicle, and once it straightened out, I was constantly checking my rear view for headlights, but none came. I remember the car pulled over about halfway down the road ahead of me. However, as I approached it, I pulled out onto the road, and I was forced to follow it as more turns were coming, and I could no longer safely pass them. I decided to drive home instead of to my friend's house, as her parents weren't home, and I didn't want to lead him there if he was possibly following me. I still think back to this car that was driving in front of me. It ended up staying in front of me. However, I still think back to this car that ended up driving in front of me and staying in front of me almost my entire drive home. I was already speeding, but they were keeping pace in front of me, so I'd never passed them. And 10 minutes later, when I realized he wasn't in pursuit of me, I started being convinced that I had been mistaken or wrong. I had to be right. or say hi